So we just would like to take a few minutes before we jump into our remarks about kind of recapping what we've learned this week. And I do say we because we've learned from each of you about what's going on in your area, and I appreciate that. So, we started off on Wednesday, 3 days ago, with some overviews, trying to help some people who are newer to the program. We talked that morning about the flexibility you have as a grantee of this block grant program, and how so much of the rules are really in that fun gray area where you really get to flesh out definitions and policies and procedures. And we still want to be a resource to you if you want to get ideas about how other grantees are approaching those interpretations. We'll do our best to try to point you in different directions, tell you what we've learned when we've been out in the field. But for the most part, if you hear our answer being, it's up to you, we're really not trying to pass the buck. It's because it really is up to you. And we can't tell you to do it one way or the other. We can give you our best recommendation. We can give you resources, but it's up to you. But if it's an area where it's very clear, then we'll tell you, no, you can't do it. Also, just kind of on that note, over the week we've been getting suggestions for written guidance that we could follow up and issue to all of you. I know we've in the past gotten a request to do an updated IM on administrative costs, so that's in the works. We got a request this week to do some guidance about the clearly erroneous rule and when we might find your interpretation to maybe not be reasonable, so we're going to look into that. And I think I'm forgetting one other guidance request that we got on the obligation rules that, yes, which was our lively conversation the second half of Wednesday morning, right? When Yulia was talking about how do you obligate funds? How do you expend funds? How does this interplay with refunds you get from vendors or from your sub-grantee local agencies? That was a really fun conversation. I have a feeling I'll be hearing from, and Aiken will be hearing from a lot of you about that. But as you can tell, we wanted that to be up front and center on the first day because for us, that's been an area where we've been seeing a lot of confusion and issues, and it's really been impacting the reallotment that grantees have been reporting to us in the last few years. And so, as we've been saying all along, we really don't want the money back. If we find that the obligation was not proper, then of course we're going to have to take it back, but it really pains us when we see a few $1 million coming back. But if you do report that to us timely with that carryover and reallotment report, we do have that opportunity to redistribute those funds in the next federal fiscal year, which is what we'll be doing for the 2014 funds very shortly. But if we find out about it a few years down the road, unfortunately, our obligation period for the funds has also passed, and so we don't have the authority to reissue those funds. It goes back to the Department of Treasury, and they do with it whatever they need to do with it. After that, in the afternoon of Wednesday, we talked about tribes and states working in partnership with one another and the potential value to talking on some sort of frequent basis about having a written agreement that kind of spells out the coordination between your programs, trying to make sure it's clear who's serving who and when and how, and referral opportunities and potentially changes to the allocation to meet the accurate need that's out there. Then Kate and Joji talked about monitoring and some of the things that we've seen some of you do in your monitoring practices for your own staff as well as for sub-grantees if you have those. And then we kind of closed out the day with talking about the reports. That was pretty straightforward. Jamia and Leon did a great job talking about all the various reports that we have, because we can't get out to all of you every year, even though we'd like to. Then yesterday, we kind of delved into the morning. We all broke up. Tribes and territories got to work on their payment matrices and talk about different policy interpretations. And it sounded like that was such a good conversation. You had a follow-up conversation this morning, so I hope you really got something out of that session and are walking away with some more information in that area. States had the pleasure of convening at 8 a.m. to talk about data collection and performance measures, but I think Melissa and Nick from the Apprise team did a really good job of trying to walk everyone through that to some extent. We didn't quite get to finish the conversation. Some of those last few slides were kind of recapping what the actual measures are and what the impact is that they're telling. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to contact one of us and we can schedule a time to talk about that either today or on the phone when you're back in your offices. But again, with those measures kicking in 2016, we really want to make sure you're clear about ideally where you should be in that timeline of being prepped to collect that data starting in October. And then in the afternoon yesterday, we got to mix it up a little bit and have some outside speakers talking about weatherization. We had Holly from the Department of Energy trying to distinguish if you're running your LIHEAP money for weatherization through the DOE WAP grant, what that implication is for you. Try to talk about the flexibility you have if you want to run it parallel, so that even if you're using the same sub-grantee, you might have separate contracts to that agency, one with your LIHEAP funding for weatherization, one with your DOE weatherization funding, and that way you can have some flexibility in the rules that you apply for weatherization. And just trying to emphasize that to the extent you're going to deviate from the DOE rules, please be clear about that in your LIHEAP plan to us, so that when DOE goes out to monitor, when we go out to monitor, when your auditors go out to look at the programs, we all have a clear understanding of what rules are supposed to apply to those funds. And again, just being mindful of that 10% admin applies regardless of the source of federal funding. Doesn't mean that you can't use other sources of federal funding for your LIHEAP admin. It just means that total, it cannot exceed 10% of your LIHEAP grant for that year. Then we heard from the HUD Healthy Homes folks, and we had someone from Baltimore talking about their one-stop shop approach, and EPA and the poor woman on sick leave who came in, Ruth Ann. I felt bad about that. It's been a week for some people. So hopefully that gave you some helpful ideas about how to integrate other services at the local level. And then we tried to close yesterday talking about financial capability, and you heard from Gretchen from our Assets for Independence program talking about a tool that all of you can use and that you can share with your subgrantees called the planning guide, I believe is what she called it, where it can help an organization walk through, okay, if I want to do financial capability training, or if I want to adjust my financial capability training, let me take a kind of a stock assessment of what resources do I have, what capacity do I have, and what adjustments would I need to make to be able to better tailor that training as we want it to be. So that's a planning tool that she was talking about for you and your subgrantees. It might be something you want to share at your upcoming training events for your subgrantees for them to use internally. And then Zach was trying to share with you the second tool that's really more for the frontline intake workers, the people who are face-to-face with the clients, and giving them some confidence and comfort level in being able to talk about difficult financial issues that that household may be facing. And that tool is called Your Money, Your Goals. And unfortunately, he didn't really seem to have much time to walk through the tool itself. Our staff actually got a half day of training just on that tool. But I will say that his organization, the Consumer Financial Protection Board, they've been doing this training all around the country for front-end staff. They've already trained more than 1,000 providers, and they are very happy to keep going out there. So if you think you would like some training for your staff, or you want to pass that resource along to your subgrantees so they can get the training, they can tailor it to the time that you have. They can do a 1-hour session, they can do a full day session. And I can tell you, after I emerged from that training, I really felt like, okay, I thought I was pretty financially capable, but I learned some stuff, and it reminded me of some things I should be considering. So it really is a helpful tool. It's not trying to make anyone an expert in finance. It's just trying to have you kind of have almost like a checklist, but what's really nice about it is each module can really work independently of the other modules. So if someone really is only struggling in one area or only has time to focus in one area, you can just tease that out and focus on that. And this tool is free online. I presume you could just Google Your Money, Your Goals, and it'll pop up. They allow you, it's not copyrighted. You can customize it however you want. So it's a really great resource, and I'm sorry we didn't have more time to delve into it, but I encourage you to try to check that out. And then today we had a whirlwind discussion on audits and risk assessments. And I was really interested in the conversation John was having with some of you just now about the risk assessment. And, you know, of course, you can probably guess we have our own risk assessment process, because likewise we can't get out to over 200 grantees every year. And so we have to prioritize who we go to each year. And likewise, we don't share many details about that process, because we don't want anyone to think, oh, I'm a 5 or I'm a 4. That's not what it's about. It's really just trying to help us sort through, okay, we have X number of people to do this. We have X number of people to visit. How do we sort through who we go to this year? And when we go out there, how we can prioritize what we're looking at, just as what people were just discussing. So really encourage you to have further conversations with John and others who were speaking up about what they do in that area. So that kind of recaps how we got to this point. We do have some general kind of updates, and want to provide this as a Q&A opportunity as well. So don't feel like you have to hold your questions. Just speak up as you think of something or any comments you want to provide. We were going to talk a little bit about the budget, and I will say, in case anyone's going to need to leave early, as you're probably aware, again, for those of you who are going to NIETA and NUAC, Akam and I will be at NIETA for Sunday morning, a good part of that session, and then several of us will be at NUAC. We're scheduled to speak 3 times on Monday. The tribal session will, again, be kind of continuing this policy interpretation and answering questions people have. The 2 o'clock general dialogue with federal officials will probably cover a lot of what we've covered this week. So if you're looking for a session to skip, that's probably the session, if you don't want to hear us say this all over again. So the one difference is that several people were reaching out to us over the winter and spring saying, you know, we've had some really great people be part of this home energy assistance community, and we're having a lot of turnover in people in the community. It'd be really great if there was a way we could formally recognize some of the achievements that people have been contributing to the program. So we were having conversations with NIETA and others about some sort of award that we could do, and we're hoping to do it on an annual basis starting this year. And so we're going to present that award virtually at the 2 o'clock session. The first recipient is Kay Joslin, the former project director for the Clearinghouse. She was with the National Center for Appropriate Technology, NCAT, out of Montana. They've been our contractor to run the LIHEAP Clearinghouse. And so Sherry Vogel, who's been with that organization working on the Clearinghouse for a long time, has stepped up in that role. And is assisted by Travis and a few others. But Kay has more or less stepped out, and as you know, I think we've all turned to her over the years to ask questions and get her feedback, and so she'll be getting that award through Skype on Monday.
Eternal Flame Award.
The Eternal Flame Award, because you're helping to keep the heat and flame for cooling too on for these low-income populations. So that'll be the one thing that we're not doing this week. We wanted to try to do it in a venue where we'd reach the most people possible who've interacted with her. And then that Monday afternoon, the last session, is the dialogue that's focused for energy vendors and utilities, and we'll see how that goes.
Unscripted, most likely.
Yeah. It'll be focused on performance measurement, I'm sure, and we'll answer those questions. And then just a reminder, the performance measures work group is doing a session, I believe, Tuesday afternoon, the last session on performance measures, and that'll be another great opportunity to talk about that. So, in terms of updates we wanted to share, I feel like I'm talking a lot, but soon we'll turn over to Akam. I just wanted to kind of recap where we're at with the budget. So as you know, we've done 3 releases of the 2015 money. The first awards went out around October 15th, and we were able to release 90% of the funding that we got under our temporary budget. And our temporary budget was level funding from the prior year. And then in late January, around January 21st, we issued almost all of the remaining money once we had a final budget from Congress. And I can't quite recall how much that money was offhand, but that was about maybe 9% of the remaining 10%. And then just earlier this month, around June 4th, we released the remaining 1%. And we had held that 1% back because the Secretary of HHS has the authority to transfer money among programs to meet HHS priorities as they develop throughout the year. So we were trying to reserve some money for that potential use. And then we learned that that probably would not be needed this year, so we were able to get that out to all of you. So all of the 2015 money that was appropriated to us for this year has now been issued. You should have received your award letter. If you have not, please let us know. We have been hinting that there will be one more award letter, and that's redistributing the 2014 money, the reallotment money. Again, you should be seeing a Federal Register notice get published soon. That will be your opportunity to let us know if we've listed you within a reallotment amount and you think that amount is wrong. Please let us know, because once we deobligate the funds in the payment management system, we cannot put them back. If you think you're not listed and you should be, that there was a correction, an error, whatever, please let us know about that as well. So again, we can reuse that money while we still have time to do that. And I think the total is somewhere around 5 or 6 million that would be distributed amongst all of you. So a very small award letter coming out within the next 6 weeks or so. Yes, John.
I have a question on support letters and the guidance.
Yeah.
In the fall allocation, I think it had, no, in the
January.
had to do requirements.
Right. The June letter, right?
Yeah.
Right. I can explain. No. So John's point is about what we were just discussing this morning with states about the new uniform administrative guidance from the Federal Office of Management and Budget, OMB, that combined a bunch of old circulars or guidance from them relating to audits and cost principles and what have you. So the January award letter erroneously had a footnote on it that said that that new uniform administrative guidance would apply for 2015. We consulted internally, and it was agreed that for LIHEAP, we would delay implementation for that, starting with federal fiscal year 2016. So beginning October 1 of this year, it will take effect. We really didn't want to put grantees in the position of having to track different funds under different rules this year, since we had already released money back in October. So there was no footnote about it on the June letter. But we, was that true? There's no footnote on the June letter. I believe in the Dear Colleague letter that went out about it, we said that it would take effect with the next year, to disregard the footnote in the January letter. And so the terms and conditions to the 2015 grant award has not incorporated the Uniform Administrative Guidance for LIHEAP. It will be in the 2016 grant award terms and conditions.
Because we were still getting clarifications back then. That's why I think one of the reasons that you saw the footnote, we were still getting clarifications, and you know that. So finally, I think we were able to assert that the new OMB does not kick in until fiscal year 16.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but do check the Dear Colleague letter that went out with the, I think it was the June award letters, because I think that's where we said disregard. Yeah. Yes, but again, for any auditor purpose, It won't be in the terms and conditions for the 2015 grant award letter. It will be in the 2016 grant award letter. And that's what they're supposed to be testing against. So we realize there'll be that inconsistency with the January award letter. So between the terms and conditions and the Dear Colleague letter, that should be enough. If that's not enough, please refer them to us. Yes.
So just to pick up on that, we had already made the changes.
Okay.
And had already notified everybody that everything was going to be under the new super circular.
Yep.
So that's okay.
That's perfectly fine. You're ahead of the game. You're welcome to have implemented it early. I'm sorry if that was because of our original notice.
Well, it was, but I understand.
Okay.
But having done it, we didn't want to go back and
No. Perfectly understandable. Now that you're you're ahead of the curve, less to do for October. Yeah. Yes.
The distribution of the reallotment, is that all formula
Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, wherever you are back there. The reallotment will go all through the old formula, I believe.
It goes by whatever formula is in effect, since the new formula now was, whatever formula is in effect by the appropriation, since the new formula now the appropriation is passed, it'll all go to the old formula.
Right. So what Peter is saying is that the reallotment, warm weather stay, yes, I'm sorry. It follows whatever the appropriations language or statutory language would say for that year. And again, because our statute is unauthorized currently, we're beholden to any clarifying language in the appropriation. And this year's appropriation language said new formula funding is capped at $491 million, I think it was. So that means any additional funding would go through the old formula only. But again, we are talking about some grantees may get an award letter or not even get a grant award letter because I think we have a minimum floor of $25, but you might get $25 depending on the grantee. Yeah. So don't spend it all in one place, right? I know. Other questions or comments about the budget for 15? For 2016, you might be aware that the president released his proposed budget back in February, I believe it was. And there are some new proposals in there compared to prior years. And forgive me, we usually work on 3 different budget years at a time, so I might be getting things confused. But there's a proposal in there relating to weatherization and changing the rules about how much should be spent for weatherization and trying to give you more flexibility on the ceiling going up to 40%. We talked a little bit about this for those of you that were at the winter and EA meeting. And then there's a proposed floor of 10%. And then there's a proposal in there about the Utility Innovation Fund, which would be a discretionary sort of funding out of the LIHEAP money, optional proposal from any of you about how you would work with partners, particularly your energy vendors and your local partners, community action agencies or other partners to really test innovative strategies for reducing home energy burden. And then there's also something that you may have seen in prior proposals about a mandatory contingency trigger. And so basically this, as you know, we haven't had an appropriation or funding for emergency contingency in several years now. So like now some states are being affected by flooding from the tropical storm and that. We don't have any contingency money this year to be able to release to help with any of those kinds of natural disasters right now. We have had it in the past. We've been able to release it relating to certain events like Hurricane Katrina and that, but we don't have it presently. But the idea behind this proposal for the contingency trigger is that we would not be so beholden on the annual appropriation process to have contingency funding. So basically the proposal outlines 6 or so different trigger conditions or criteria, and they relate to electricity prices and heating prices and heating degree days and what have you, and if they're triggered, then we will just automatically have an allocation for contingency purposes. And so ideally it would help streamline our ability to release money for these kinds of events, because absent that, in the past we've had to work through some extensive negotiations with our own agency, HHS, OMB, about the formula that will be used, the different criteria that we will consider, and getting that release of funds. So this should be very clear that if these conditions are met, then here's the formula, and then poof, you have your funding to get out. So in the past, you know, there were times like back during the height of the recession, we were looking at unemployment rates and what have you. So those are some of the newer aspects of the 2016 proposal. And as you might know, for those of you staying for NUAC next week, our Assistant Secretary, our Acting Assistant Secretary, Mark Greenberg, is going to be the luncheon keynote speaker on Monday. So he'll also talk a bit about the budget. But if you have any initial questions, I'm happy to answer that now. Great. Oh, John, yes. I was this close. Or comment. Oh. No, seriously, what were you going to say? Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, we hear you on that. I mean, Jeannie says this all the time, and I think we all wholeheartedly agree. We don't know how you do your jobs, honestly. I mean, you have such hard work trying to plan a program without knowing how much funding you're going to get or when you're going to get the funding, trying to use the resources, balance that fine line between how much benefits to give out and how many households you serve and when. So, you know, I really don't know how you all do it. You know, you've earned my highest respect. It's really helped, quite frankly, to have had some consistency in our organizational leadership. We've had Jeannie as our office director for the last 4 years or so. And, you know, she came to us with experience from your state working as a LIHEAP director and a CSBG director. So she understood it personally and really fought hard to help us bring awareness throughout the administration about the urgency of the funding. And so every year, this was something that Nick St. Angelo started back when he was the director of our Division of Energy Assistance. We have an annual meeting, say in August, with all of our various federal stakeholders, at least within HHS, about the allocation process. And we just, because we know they're working a lot of different programs and LIHEAP can be fairly intricate, refresh their memories about who's doing what and when and how it all works so that we can streamline the process. And I think that's really been helping quite a bit as well. So we agree. October 15th was fantastic. Everything just moved according to plan, which is, as you know, not always the case. So here's knocking on whatever this is, if it's real wood or not, I don't know, that continues. And again, the reason for the delayed funding with the 1% was because of trying to reserve that discretion within the department for any urgent needs. You know, in the past, there had been some unexpected needs elsewhere relating to unaccompanied alien children crossing the borders, which is a program that's run by our agency. We have I don't know if you realize how many different programs. I mean, most people haven't really heard of the Administration for Children and Families, but Head Start, TANF, Office of Refugee Resettlement, Child Support Enforcement, Child Care. I mean, a lot of big programs. Native American, Administration for Native Americans, CSBG. A lot of the programs that you're working on and others are within our agency. And so we're that little social service cousin of HHS trying to get that stuff done. Well, great. Well, we just flew through the budget stuff. unless there are any other comments or questions. Yes? Yes, John. No, really, we want to hear from you. I'm just teasing you.
Could you summarize the TNTA?
The TNTA money, sure. So, sure. So, up until 2012, I'll go back to, for the virtue of those who are newer to our family here, we would get a flat $300,000 out of the total LIHEAP allocation from Congress for our office to do monitoring of the program with all of you, to do our training and technical assistance, which is why we really haven't had events like this up until the last few years, to run our clearinghouse, which is through a contract to NCAT, as I mentioned. And so 300,000, as you can imagine, is really not much. I mean, it's a lot to us personally, but it's not a lot of money for a multi-billion-dollar program. And then, frankly, when that 2010 GAO report came out, suddenly it brought attention on the Hill to members of Congress that, well, you have high expectations for monitoring and program integrity and all good stuff, but how can we help to accomplish that with $300,000? So starting in 2012, we started to get about $3 million. It's been just shy of that, depending on the year, if there was sequestration or rescissions or what have you. So we hover like just under $3 million. And so beginning in 2012, we awarded, I think, 7 different contracts. And a lot of that work has continued since then through new contracts or follow-on contracts. And so the major contract is for monitoring because we really wanted to step up the quality of our monitoring visits. And so prior to 2012, we would maybe get out to 4 or 5 grantees a year for 2.5 days or so, and it was really just focused on programmatic issues because we didn't have any fiscal expertise in-house or out-of-house. So with 2012, we were able to bring on a federal auditor, we were able to bring on some fiscal contractors. And so that's a large chunk. That's almost $1 million that goes to the fiscal contract support that we get for those monitoring visits. And so now our visits, depending on the size of the grantee, will be upwards of a week. And we'll have a team that's kind of split in half between program focus and fiscal focus. And I'm kind of touching into Akam's area, but we had a nice conversation yesterday after the close of the day with some grantees that have been monitored this year and are on the schedule for this year. And we really appreciated the time that you took out of your personal time to provide us the feedback of what your experience was and what it is so far and what your expectations are. And we're going to work hard to try to meet those. We know that the visits have been kind of on a different feel so far this year, and so we're trying to make some mid-course adjustments. You know, we're working with a new contractor this year for monitoring, and so trying to get all the new players working well together. So hopefully the rest of the visits will go pretty smoothly, but we want to hear your feedback regardless of whether it's good or bad or in between. Another big chunk has been going to training and technical assistance. So, for example, the event today, the regional events we did last year, those have all been through contracts. Last year, the training contracts were through LIHEAP. They had a 2-year contract, essentially, for helping us with the regional meetings, the national meeting back in San Diego 2 years ago, helping with follow-up technical assistance visits after monitoring visits so that we can help grantees focus on the 1 or 2 issues that are probably most in need of follow-up action, and as well as helping supplement our webinar activities and that. And so that work has continued this year. We have new contractors, just no reflection on LIHEAP at all, just it's the contracting process. So it's kind of split out into 2 contracts. We have 1 contract to help support the conference logistics, the actual getting the facilities and getting the agendas all prepped and out to all of you and the whole registration process. And so that was through our partners, Capital Consulting, the people out in the front hall there assisting you this week. And then the larger contract is with an organization called Brilliant. and they have a subcontractor out of Indiana, I believe, called Engaging Solutions. So their subcontractor, Engaging Solutions, is focused on the on-site training and technical assistance visits that are mostly related to our monitoring follow-up. And then Brilliant has been more focused on the content, helping us to prepare the actual presentations for the conferences, helping us with the webinars. We've done several webinars this year. We did one on categorical eligibility. We did one on, I think we already did it on reaching remote populations, or maybe it's coming up. I've lost track of our schedule. We had one that we were going to do on uniform administrative guidance, and then that got put on hold pending issuing the information memorandum. But we're going to reschedule that webinar, and that will be coming up soon. We'll send out a notice about that. And Yulia probably remembers off the top of her head the next few webinars coming up.
We're going to be on the model plan in terms of OLBC coming forward, updates, and there's going to be one about using social media in your work for in outreach and
Okay, so in case you couldn't hear her, there's at least 2 to 3 more webinars coming up, one on uniform administrative guidance, one on the state or grantee plan. The action transmittal about that is going to be going out, again, if not by today, certainly by Monday. We apologize that took a while to get out this year, but really the only difference in it, aside from updating dates, is providing those instructions on how you can pre-populate your information from last year's plan into this year's plan so you don't have to rewrite it all. If you haven't already talked to your liaison, they have those instructions and can also help you with that, so feel free to reach out to them because there is a cloning option in OLDC for that. And so we'll have a webinar to walk you through that as well and answer any questions you have. And then another webinar on using social media. So those are our webinars. Other contracts I'm forgetting. So the contract last year ended with NIHEAP for program accountability. That had focused on doing some research into the various recommendations we got from the Program Integrity Work Group and GAO about third-party verification. And so we're still analyzing some of the reports that they produced from that contract about options there. What other contracts do we have? I'm forgetting the contracts. Oh, yeah. I guess we've invested in that a little bit, yeah. So we have a big contract with Apprise Incorporated, our nonprofit research organization out of Princeton, New Jersey. I believe that's around $450,000. That contract helped develop the performance management website that was demonstrated yesterday morning for states that Melissa and the work group actually demonstrated, Jenny and Jane and that. And they're continuing to test that and develop it. We're hoping to make some of that data available to the public, be as transparent as we can with the information. It also includes all of the technical assistance that Apprise is supporting us with on performance measures. So for those states that have had on-site visits by Melissa or Nick, all the calls that you get from Nick and Melissa and emails coming out of that contract. We also have a separate smaller contract with them to help provide support for us on the report to Congress and the home energy notebook. And so again, a lot of those calls that you got from Nick Cavallo about, okay, you reported this on your grantee survey or your house report, but this is not clear. Can we work through this? That's funded through that contract. And my clearinghouse, gosh, it's Friday. And then we have the clearinghouse contract, which I believe is around $300,000 or so, maybe just under that, or just about that. And so that contract we awarded again in March of this year, and hopefully all of you have had a chance to check out the Clearinghouse website. Again, you can just Google LIHEAP Clearinghouse and it'll pop up. They really supplement the amount of information we're able to provide about the range of approaches that all of you take to whether you centrally administer your program or if you're using other partners, community action agencies or whomever, and what the rules are about winter moratoria to prevent shutoffs, or about your different eligibility rules, your state median income guidelines and that. So there's really a lot of information on there. All of the plans are posted on there. So if you want to actually read another grantee's plan, you can go find them on there. There are sample vendor agreements. I believe there are sample applications. Just a lot of great tools on that website. Did I answer a question, John, about the TNTA money? Okay. All right. All right. Hopefully you think it's well spent. If not, let us know. Susan.
Warren, I went on to the Clearinghouse website a couple weeks ago to look at the state plans, because that's something I have done consistently in the past.
Yeah.
And I don't see them on there anymore now that they've gone on to OLTC.
No.
Someone send us directions as to how to find them, because
Sure.
when you click on states, you're not getting the state plans, and I spent quite a bit of time looking at them, couldn't find them.
So they did redesign the look of the website recently, and it's taken me a little while to get adjusted to that. But when you go to the home page, I believe kind of in the middle there, you can choose on state or tribe information. And presently, if you click on tribe, then there's kind of a jump bar near the top in blue where there's the link to the tribal manual. Again, I recommend everybody check that out because it's really more of a grantee manual. It's a really great resource that's been around for a while. But if you click on state information, and this is likewise for tribe, and then you click on the jump bar, I think it says administration. There's a pull-down menu, and I believe one of the options is for plans and manuals and that. It's the second option down. But we'll be happy to send out a follow-up email, and if you still can't find it, just let us know.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Sure. Other questions or comments? Jerry?
You said let us know if I thought it was well spent.
Yes? Okay.
I think, particularly for a prize, we've got until we get this going.
Yeah.
I think that's well spent.
Yeah.
I just want to talk about sort of that going forward. I think that federal compliance review is absolutely number one, that you need to keep all the money you need to get out to the states. I think that's a valuable thing that I need in a long time.
Mm-hmm. Great, because you had a visit last year, right? And that went well?
Very well.
Yay.
Yeah, I mean, even if
To know that.
there was no real fear involved with it, but what it did, it required a lot of self-examination in preparation.
Mm-hmm.
And, okay, there's a lot of self-examination in preparing for that. That was very useful. And I just thought that was, I'm glad to see that start happening and happening on a more regular basis. And so that's the first thing. That money's going forward, you need to keep doing that.
Just out of curiosity, if I can stop you for a second, how long had it been? Because you've been with the program for a while.
Never.
You had never been visited by us
No.
prior to last year?
No.
They
Wow.
had a desk review in 2000.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, which doesn't even register, okay.
Yeah.
So, good. Well, so I started to mention earlier, we used to do 4 to 5 a year. This year we're up to 16 a year, and we try to make sure at least a quarter to a third of those are for tribal grantees and territory grantees moving forward. So, so we're excited because
I just
we're
think
getting
that-
out to see it in action for
And I
change.
think they'll become more valuable as your staff gets out there and starts to see the variation of how these programs are run, the political environment they're in, all of that. It's just going to get better the more you do it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. Clearinghouse, I think, really needs to continue to be taken care of, whatever level is necessary.
Mm-hmm.
For those who don't, particularly new folks, if you need to get to that site. And that really, to me, that's more important, like this mentoring stuff. If you really want to know what's going on, you go there, if you're, how some state handling this, or how, if you have some specific issue. And then finally, something that's way overdue, and I don't know how you would expand it, but I like Heather's bubble chart that I saw there yesterday. And I think any you know, if you, all this talk about risk assessment and the assessments that you do, I mean, that would mitigate a lot of concern that I personally would have, because, you know, it doesn't matter how my state's going. I'm concerned about the program, period. And when there's a state where, you know, all hell breaks loose, it's not good at, you know, Congress doesn't just say, oh, well, you know, that's Texas or whatever. They're looking at the whole program, you know, and it paints all of us. No, I'm not talking about that. But, you know, that GAO report, you know, it painted all that way.
Right.
So anything that we can do that, particularly with new folks coming on, you know, I don't think since the days of Jan Fox have we seen anything assembled that was sort of like a handbook.
Well, that tribals.
Do you discuss these issues at the NIEDA or any other format where LIHEAP directors talk about issues? Yeah, no, I'm saying as a network, do you discuss that in any forum?
Oh yeah, we sure do, and that's and every forum I get a chance to bring it up, I'm bringing it up, including this one, and I've done that.
So you're kind of saying more investment in the area of program accountability, perhaps some kind of more training tools, hands-on handbook, manuals that we can try to provide in that area of risk and that. Bubble chart is the handbook, and we just need to flesh out the chapters. Okay. Okay. Great. Great. Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful.
I just wanted to quickly comment on that because we are also looking at our own process. And Lauren mentioned about the, the brief meeting we had with some of the LIHEAP directors who were visited or about to be visited this year. We also have the risk assessment module within the office, so we're having some discussion about how to make those kind of tools helpful for us and for our network as far as looking at things from more like a proactive basis rather than just, trying to react to a problem. Is there any way we can assess risk? Of course, we had this long conversation this morning about risk assessment, but is there anything we can learn from all of this so that we can prevent things from happening? So that's like kind of my point of view on this, all of this, and we will try to come up with some specific suggestions or tools, if you will, going forward. I don't know when, but it's on the table as far as discussion is concerned.
Thank you. To tag on to Jerry's and then Akam, your question, we had our visit about 1.5 years ago for 2012, and you know where I'm going. We don't have the letter yet. To make it more relevant, to make it more useful, the quicker that can happen. I mean, I would love to see it. I would love to see them come out and do the current year and figure out some way to get that report back quickly so that we can make faster changes that are more relevant. Because quite frankly, for us to get a report in 15 or 16 for 2012, I mean, absolutely, it would be more useful to be more current.
We couldn't agree more with you because we see these monitoring visits as a learning tool or learning process for both of us. And I clearly understand that we learn something from this visit, but if we do not share that with you, then it does not become effective. So, of course, we are looking into that as well, how quickly we can clear these reports. Of course, there's a multi-layer of clearance process within our department, but we are definitely looking at it very, very closely to see how quickly we can release these reports to grantees.
Thank you. The only other comment I had was that the week that we spent with Yulia and even Josh, I mean, even he's long departed, and Chetan, the time that we spent with them was more valuable, I think, than the actual report is going to be. It was annoying and intense at times, but
can be, yes.
Yeah.
Tell us what you think.
But that was at times. But it was that week that we spent immersed in with them was really the most valuable time that I've ever had in the length of time that I've been there. Sure. So
we really appreciate hearing that, and that is the goal that we strive for with each of these visits. Sometimes we hit the mark, sometimes we don't, and so again, just feel like you can reach out to us so we know where we are at with our meeting our own expectations. But again, we look at this as a mutual learning experience. We don't know it all. I certainly have not been working in the program for 30 years. I don't know it all. So the more we can put our heads together and talk through things, I think the better we'll all be. And so it should not feel like an interrogation. It may feel like that at times, only because we do have a lot of questions that we're trying to work through, but we're trying to work on that approach so that it doesn't come across that way as much. We have curious minds and we want to know, but there is a better way we can probably do that, so we're working on that.
The monitoring, since we're in the same
Yeah,
topic.
well, so Jane has a comment, but then we can maybe, I don't know if anyone else had a comment, but Jane, do you want to quickly weigh in on this?
Back on the policy.
Yeah.
I guess just to add on is that the letter also can be an empowering or a leverage, so that if you do want to make these program changes, you sometimes need that letter on a higher level as leverage to make those things happen. So.
Right, and to that end, I know when we've been on visits, we've had conversations kind of offline with the directors about where you're running into kind of internal obstacles, and because oftentimes those obstacles address something that is going to be in the letter anyway. So that to the extent that we can be helpful about, well, if there was more of an investment or priority with IT support, then they could move quicker with performance measures or what have you. We completely agree that this is a great mechanism for that.
Mike? Any other questions?
Yeah.
Mike, you have a question?
We promised in the agenda to touch a little bit on what we're seeing so far this year in monitoring visits, so Aiken was going to run through that, but Michael, you have the mic.
Well, it's not a question, just a comment.
Okay.
Very appreciative of you all taking the time out of your schedules to give us 3 days for all of us to interact, but also to hear what you're seeing, give us new ideas. This has been, I love the format of regional and then national, and getting an opportunity for all of us to talk, because this, going back, I brought 2 staff. They've got a whole list of meetings set up for next week to talk
Great.
about things that we've learned here.
Good.
So thank you to you and your staff, Lauren, and we'll follow up with comments back to Jeannie about this is very successful, in my opinion.
Great, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
Right. So as Lauren mentioned, I'm going to give you a quick overview of what we are seeing so far. As you know, we have 16 site visits scheduled for this calendar year, and those are for fiscal year 2013. So we have 13 states in the list and 3 tribal agencies. So far we have done like almost half of the visits, and we're seeing some really good trends, like as far as best practice is concerned, and of course some issues. So I'd like to just give you some overview on those. But before I do that, I just wanted to mention one other thing as far as update is. I don't know if you have noticed that our office has started holding conference calls with our grantees on a quarterly basis. So we have, so far we have held 2. But there will be more conference calls coming up. So one request I have of you is that if you think that if there are any areas or any topics that you think would be beneficial for us to discuss as a group, as a region, just let your OCS contact know, because we would like to make this conference call more and more productive. The whole idea is to share what we are seeing on a quarterly basis with you, and then also hear from you what you have to share with us. And of course, if there's any state-specific issue, we don't want to discuss that issue, or anything that you have that's specific to a specific grantee, feel free to let your staff point of contact know so that we can follow up. But we thought that it would be a good idea to continue or start some kind of a group discussion on a regular basis, because of course we have these meetings every year. We also see each other in NIEDA and some other format. But once again, we just wanted to make these calls productive for you, for your time and our time. With that, wanted to jump into some of the best practices. I'm going to just follow the same routine as we do when you are in your office. We go through the best practices first, then we talk about issues, then we talk about recommendations. We do not have any recommendations. I do have some issues that we'd like to share with you. However, just a clarification that these issues are not necessarily issues. These are topics that we are seeing as issue. So, for example, before I jump in, one example I can give you. We are seeing state planning process is an issue, for example. This is not a real issue, but that can be a strength for you as well. It can be a best practice. So as you can see, what I'm trying to get at is that we are not pinpointing and saying that as a network you are not doing something right. What we're seeing that in those instances, we saw that some of the states we visited or some of the tribes we visited were not following the minimum requirements needed for state planning process. But you can also make the state planning process a rewarding experience. And in those cases, of course, we'll note that as a best practice. So you see my point, it can go both ways. So the very first best practice that we are very impressed of, we saw that in one, I'm not going to mention any grantee name here, but in one place we saw almost, I call it real-time benefit payment system, which means that eligibilities are determined. These are not crisis cases, regular cases. Within few hours, utility companies are contacted right away, and payment commitments are made from the same system within few hours. So while our staff were sitting in front of the intake folks, we noticed that 3 or 4 payments processed within 20 minutes because they had all the information needed at that point. So we thought that was very impressive. The second best practice, in one place we saw that the LIHEAP weatherization manager has done 100% QNC visits. So whatever, regardless of number of houses they weatherized out of LIHEAP money, were visited by the LIHEAP, the weatherization director and completed a QNC. Quality control kind of. It's not necessarily a DOE type quality control, but we were very impressed to see that every single house that they visited, they actually done some work, were visited by the staff. And of course, that's a really nice customer service approach, I believe. So another place we noticed that joint intake days, they were rounding up people in different organizations in one place, in several places, and doing joint intake. We have also seen this type of effort in the past, but specifically this fiscal year, this was noted by our staff. The other one was Okay, so joint intake dates means that you would bring in different folks from different agencies, different places, and you would do a LIHEAP intake day, for example, where you could take 500 applications in one day or 1,000 applications one day. So it would probably be in a central location, could be an office, or could be in a central location where you'd advertise that day. People would come and they would be able to fill out their LIHEAP application on that day.
Yeah, just if I can add to that. Sometimes they'll even have volunteers from the utility companies or other organizations help out for the day, and it can be at a convention center, it could be at a university like this, some central place where you're trying to kind of reduce the day-to-day administrative burden of the LIHEAP intake offices and kind of have a central place where they get the word out, LIHEAP intake day. So we saw that this year, we've seen that in the past, and it's worked really well.
And the next one is about system development, I think, because in some places, actually, I have seen that in more than one place where they have developed a central intake system which is almost running on a real-time basis so that the state grantee is able to go to the system, see their application trends, see how and when payments are being made. And we believe that it is also a very, very good monitoring tool because you don't have the time and resources to be on your subgrantees back all the time. So if you have a system like that, and even from my own personal experience when I was at the state level, that having the right software, right tracking tool in place can cut down a lot of staff hours, time, resources that's needed to understand your subgrantee operations on a regular basis. Okay, so once again, my clarification, these are issues we saw, but this can be also a best practice. The first one is every place that we visited so far, they all had a fair hearing process or LIHEAP appeal process, as you know. However, it's not very consistent because the way the requirements are written, that it should be progressively more authoritative. So, for example, a client comes into a LIHEAP agency, applies for LIHEAP benefit, that gets denied, they should have a way to appeal at that first level. If they're not happy, they should be able to go to the state level. If they're not happy with the LIHEAP office, there should be, another layer. I'm not recommending the layers, but as you can see, I'm trying to explain that there should be a progressive authority in this process. And then they should feel free to come to HHS if necessary. So what we saw that in some places the appeal process stops at the subgrantee level, or in some cases the appeal process stops at the LIHEAP office. In some cases there was no subgrantee appeal process in place. So what we are saying is that that the appeal process, the fair hearing process, should be laid out in a way so the client has several levels of option as far as refuting a LIHEAP determination. Next one, public hearing. I mentioned a little bit about the state planning process. What we have seen in at least a couple of occasions, that the public hearing process, in our opinion, was not so meaningful, and I'll give you a couple of hints why we thought it was not meaningful. Of course, they had public hearing. It was too late. First of all, in one case, it was held in late, like third week in August, or almost fourth week in August, a couple of days before plans were due to us. So the question I had for that place is that if you had only 2 days to hold your public hearing, make changes, take all your testimony, and then submit the state plan to HHS on September 1st, it's virtually impossible, which means that it's not a meaningful process. A meaningful process should give you enough time to get feedback, make all the announcement, get feedback, and also absorb those feedbacks so that if necessary you can make changes to your draft state plan before it comes to us. So not having a meaningful public hearing process we saw is an issue. Another one is crisis. The crisis process, the crisis requirement is well laid out in our requirements, and also it's part of your state plan, which means that subgrantees or whoever is running LIHEAP, they should have a very clear definition of what crisis is, and then also a clear distinction between 48 hours and 18-hour rules. So in some of those places we visited, we did not see that. In one place, they had a written policy, but it was not well communicated to the subgrantee level. So when we visited the subgrantee, we were not able to confirm whether the subgrantee staff really understood the distinction between regular crisis and life-threatening crisis.
Yeah, we see that a lot, if I can just jump in for a second.
For some reason, yeah.
And the funny thing is, it seems like in practice, they're often actually meeting the deadline, but they don't even realize that they had a deadline, or at least that the deadline was 18 hours, or that there's a distinction between two deadlines. So just maybe reinforcing that through your training would be helpful.
Yes, sure. And these are all programmatic findings, but in the past we had some fiscal findings, so I'm not going to get into those. This is a really serious one that I'm going to talk about, and please keep an eye on your subgrantees. We talked about risk assessment, we talked about auditing, we talked about all these different things that are coming into play. What we have seen in one place, it's a very serious matter, that they had high-risk subgrantees. I would use the word subgrantees in this case, more than one. And the LIHEAP office at the state level, in our opinion, was not doing anything that is effective. There are a lot of things you can do when you have an at-risk sub-grantee. What happens next? I mean, I come from the other side. You know that if you have a high-risk sub-grantee and you don't do anything about it, or if the sub-grantee does not do anything about it, the agency is going to fail. And when the agency fails, in addition to risk with federal funds, clients have no place to go. So in this specific case, a sub-grantee is at high risk, they're not operational, and low-income folks are running around the neighborhood, they don't know where to go to apply for LIHEAP assistance. When they contact the state says we are going through the sub-grantee risk process, whatnot. So this is a pretty serious matter. I would really urge you to keep an eye on your sub-grantees if you have one.
Can I jump in on that one too? So you saw that on one visit, and then I saw kind of a twist on that in a different visit. On the visit I was on, it was more about how the state was working to resolve questions they had with the sub-grantee, which was great. It was great that the grantee was on top of, okay, we need to reconcile some things. The issue is that the length of time it was taking to reconcile those issues was holding up the funding to the sub-grantee, and there wasn't really a contingency in place for how to serve those households in the meantime. So we've seen at least 2 or 3 instances in different areas where a certain few counties are just basically going unserved for almost the whole heating season while various issues are being worked out. And so I guess my big takeaway point from that is we're not saying fund someone you have concerns with, but make sure you have that backup plan for who can at least temporarily cover that service area, and that outreach is being done to that area so people know where to go and when, so that you don't have some parts of your state or reservation or wherever just being kind of left out while things are being worked out.
And just wanted to add, as a follow-up from an operations standpoint, please feel free to share those at-risk situations with our staff, because we do have some expertise within our office to intervene or give you some guidance. You know better how to intervene, but at any point you feel like that you needed to discuss it with HHS, please feel free to give us a call, and we take sub-grantee issues as one of our priorities. So we should be able to jump right on that with some guidance, as far as TNTA is concerned. And we have contractors, if necessary, we can talk to our contractors, but we are, I think, about to see some trends in the network about sub-grantees, and hopefully someday we'll be able to share some trends with you, like some kind of a reasons why people fail and things like that, but we're not there yet. The last observation I have from some of this monitoring visit is that pretty much everywhere we visited, they had some type of fraud, waste, and abuse prevention policy. As you know that these days, it's almost impossible to run a federal program without having some kind of a fraud prevention policy. However, it was very inconsistent. In some cases, it was not even written. We interviewed people and we found out that it's nowhere to be found. Some people talked about processes that's been existence, but what we are suggesting you to do is please look at your fraud, waste, and abuse prevention policy and somehow make it a central depository. It could be just a whole bunch of links, whole bunch of documents. A LIHEAP specific fraud, waste, and abuse policy is needed. It's part of your state plan, it's part of your program integrity supplement, but you can also kind of spice that up with other program integrity and other fraud prevention policies. Like from a state perspective, when I was at the state level, of course we had a LIHEAP specific fraud prevention policy, but then the comptroller's office, the IG's office, Attorney General's office had a whole bunch of other fraud prevention policies. So what we did is that we sought their permission to incorporate that into a larger fraud prevention policy, saying, okay, these are the LIHEAP specific, but if you need to have a little bit more, you need to know more, these are the other resources that's available. Mike?
We don't have a LIHEAP specific fraud, waste, and abuse policy. We have a fraud, waste, and abuse policy for our agency. We have a 1-800 number on our website. All that filters to our internal auditor. If there's a fraud complaint, it doesn't even come to me until the auditor sees it, and they take the executive role in resolving that issue. Now, I work closely with him. He sits right next door to me, so I find out about it within minutes, but it's not even through the LIHEAP group. Is that acceptable in yours?
So let me ask you a question. So first of all, is that your state policy as far as fraud prevention?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's board approved through our board, our TDHCA board.
And do you advertise that policy or do outreach to LIHEAP folks, subgrantees, clients, that this is your fraud prevention policy?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure, Lauren. I mean, and what I've seen as a best practice is that few things. One is there should be there is a reporting mechanism for all the way from the client to the LIHEAP staff to the LIHEAP director or the LIHEAP in charge in that office, where they would report a specific incident of fraud, error, or waste. And then from there, it follows some kind of a state policies and procedure. As you know that fraud prevention is not just a LIHEAP issue, it's a statewide, federal, countrywide issue. So each state could have their own policy saying, okay, once you receive the fraud report, you must submit it to my legal office or to my inspector general's office, so on and so forth. But that fraud reporting process is key, I think, for LIHEAP, because people should know exactly where and how fraud should be reported.
I think the takeaway from what Akam is saying is even if the policy is the same for the whole state, the specific LIHEAP subgrantees and your LIHEAP clients and your own staff need to know how that whole process works and need to, remember we were talking about it's not enough to be educated, you have to be capable. It's not good enough to say, yeah, we know we have a process. Everyone should know how it works and how to utilize it in case, if your staff member decides to wake up one day and say, my boss is being sort of funny. I see money coming into his office and I don't even know what that's, they need to be able to report fraud on every level. Even if it's all through the same process, that process needs to not only be communicated, they need to make sure that they're empowered to use it.
Yeah, I think also it's important to keep in mind that I think it's perfectly fine to have a statewide procedure and policy for how to report and investigate, follow up on waste, fraud, and abuse. I think there's also some broader implications to waste, fraud, and abuse. So, for example, if someone has been found to have actually committed fraud in LIHEAP or some other public assistance program, does that impact their eligibility to receive LIHEAP in the future? That's a question that I think a lot of you have been wrestling with. Right. We don't have a rule on that at the federal level, so we've been deferring to your various interpretations, and we've seen the whole gamut. We've seen they're never eligible again to, we try to recoup the money, but they're eligible to apply the next year. And so what we're looking for is to see that you have a decision on that issue, you have it articulated in writing, and that's being followed consistently. And then I'd probably take it a step further and kind of incorporate some of the broader program integrity principles, right? So when you're talking about waste, fraud, and abuse, part of that is mitigated by having good internal controls and having those policies and procedures well outlined in writing and monitoring to make sure that they're followed.
And just one other thing about the subgrantee training is that subgrantee employees should feel free to bring things up to their supervisor and bring it up the chain all the way to the state level, because if they are not aware of fraud prevention policies, and we saw that at a couple of subgrantees where the staff is not aware at all what they're supposed to do if they see instance of fraud. Are they going to bring it up to their supervisor? Are they going to turn down the application? Are they going to do their own investigation? So if, as Lauren's saying, is at the state level, if you have some of those procedures written in your manual, then those staff would be able to kind of follow those in cases of fraud or suspected fraud.
And also remember that people can also be referred to the federal HHS, Office of the Inspector General, and they're independent from us. So it's, if people don't want to have to worry about reporting to us and what have you, they can work through them. And if you don't have that contact information, let us know. We can share that with you. And likewise, that's true for any other federal program. So sometimes we get complaints about WAP or SNAP, and there's an inspector general for every department in the federal government, so they can also look into those, and you can refer people to them as well.
Kate had a comment?
Yeah, I would just want to comment and add that it's not enough to just have that policy that the clients have this number to call. The staff need to know they have this number to give to clients when they say, I suspect this vendor is committing fraud, because there are states where the attorney generals are getting reports on vendors that are committing fraud, and they're acting on that and being able to recoup funds. So a lot of those vendor reports come from clients, and if the clients don't have an avenue to report those suspicions, and the staff don't know that they are perfectly within their rights to provide that kind of information, then that creates a barrier.
And as we're talking about this, it reminded me that we visited a tribe that had a really great best practice in this area, where the tribal office had a separate person dedicated to being a fraud investigator for LIHEAP. And so anytime someone said, I thought I was supposed to get X amount of wood or X quality of wood or whatever it was, this investigator would go out and check on what was delivered and follow up with the vendor or what have you, and there'd be reporting back. So we thought that was a really great practice of that tribe.
Any other comments? I just wanted to switch gear a little bit. Wanted to mention one thing about the performance measure session. Some of you have come to me or come to our staff and ask us about a price site visit or what to do with the data collection. So what I told them, I should share this with the group. I basically said, feel free to contact our staff if you need help with LIHEAP performance measures, or feel free to contact a price directly if they are available for a site visit. But what I have learned from this process, I just wanted to share my own experience with you, is that if you don't start the LIHEAP performance measure journey yesterday, you won't be able to produce the data next year. So for states that are still having issues with performance measures, collecting data from vendors, I'm not saying it's because of your state, but because of so many other moving parts are involved. You have utility companies, you have deliverable fuel companies, you have software vendors, you have sub-grantees. Please start the conversation right now if you have not done that yet. So, so just wanted to share that with you.
And Nick Cavallo, Nick, stand up. Where's Nick? Nick, oh yeah, he's available this afternoon if you would like to talk to him about performance measures and technical assistance in that area.
Susan in the back corner.
Susan?
I have a question. We were audited or monitored, whichever term you'd like to use, a few years ago. And one of the things that came up was that we were not collecting IDs or social security cards. And we are now doing that. But my question is we have repeat clients from year to year. And, we have paper files. What is HHS's take on that? Do we need to take the old pieces of paper out of the file? Can we note in our system that in such and such a year we saw the Social Security card? Do we have to have clients then bring it in every year? I kind of need to know what your thoughts on that are as we get ready to archive files this year.
As I recall, that was one of our recommended issues, and so for those of you, for the state of Alaska, they are a state centrally administered program, and so a lot of their households physically can't get to be able to apply in person, right? So they're mailing in and what have you. And so we were just trying to strategize how you can try to verify that if someone sends an application, they are who they say they are. Generally speaking, and I realize this is a challenge for a good number of people, but to the extent that you can invest in electronic systems and the scanning option so that you don't have to keep as much in hard copy from year to year, I would encourage that. If that's not feasible, I think we've seen some places where as long as the identity document, so someone will come in the next year, they received assistance in the primary year, they'll show their IDs. They're the same as the IDs that are photocopied on file from the prior year, so they won't take a new photocopy. They'll just keep those original copies in the file, and I think that's fine, but they've still looked at the ID to make sure I'm still looking at John Doe, yes. Of course, that's in a place where there's in-person intake. I think, personally, if you're at least having the intake worker note in your system or your file, I verify the documents, and then, that's better than nothing. Yeah. So again, it's one of these areas where it's really up to you. We're just encouraging you to have some sort of document trail, some kind of trail that someone checked that I'm processing the application for the right person. Sure. Other questions or comments about monitoring? I think AICM's covered all of the trends that we've seen so far this year. Well, I guess the one last thing that we wanted to mention today was just, you're probably all aware of it, but flag for your attention, back in the fall, I want to say in November or December, we released an information memorandum about citizenship requirements or qualified alien status and how to use social security numbers. And so if you've not had a chance to take a look at that IM, please do. That was a labor of love for several of us that went on for years and years and years, and predates me even. So to actually get that out was what felt like such a weight off our chests. But hopefully that was helpful to all of you. If you have questions about that guidance, please reach out to us. That was all the comments that we had for today. I'm so sorry that we ran much longer than I anticipated. If you have any additional questions, comments, feel free to speak up. So some people have scheduled consultations with some of our staff. They will be around and help you. If you have not scheduled an appointment with one of our staff, please do so before you go to lunch, because otherwise they may not know to stick around if they don't have anyone scheduled. Right. For the focus group, is anyone interested in meeting today to talk about training and technical assistance? Jerry and John kind of kick-started the conversation. Heather is... Anyone other than Heather going to join her? We'll have a one-on-one conversation. Well, yeah, and we'll have an opportunity Sunday morning for those of you who will be at the NADA meeting. We can talk about it then as well. So if no one else is interested, we won't do the focus group today. But if you are, I'll be around. We'll be around for a while. Just come up and see us. And I think that's it. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much.
Please fill out your
the survey, green form. Have a safe trip back home.